Hey guys, how's it going? It's Jay here. Welcome back to yet another episode of SoundStage Take 2. Now, this one's interesting. This one's the Kinki Studio EX-M1 Plus. This is something that many of you have been asking me to review for a very long time. So finally, it is here. Now, this one was reviewed by Roger Kanno on SoundStageHifi.com. So you can click on the link below this video to read it, or you can go to SoundStageHifi.com to check it out. Now, the Kinki Studio EX-M1 Plus is basically the XM1 except with the addition of the home theater bypass and the pre-out function, which you see on the back of the unit here. Now, I already reviewed the XM1, the original one that was released back in 2017-2018. And there has been a few silent upgrades since then, so I'll list them right here. And as you can see, there's quite a few changes to the unit, which overall should translate to better performance. Now, I also reviewed the Kinki Studio XB7 monoblocks, so it'll be very interesting for you guys to know the difference between that and this integrated unit. So we'll talk about that. But this amplifier is quite powerful. It outputs 215 watts into 8 ohms and has a damping factor of 2000. So if you want to look at the insides and more detail of the amplifier, then I suggest you go read Roger Kanno's review. But in this video, I'm going to give you the comparisons and my experience with the Kinki Studio XM1 Plus. Now, I think the sound signature, if I put it relative, is somewhere between the NAD M33 that I just recently reviewed on SoundStage and the Hago H190 that I love so much. So the Hago H190 is more of a warmer, more forgiving, slightly rolled off top end type of integrated unit. So I call that bottom up sound rather than top down. So there's more bottom end authority and weight in the bottom end than there is in the top end. And the NAD M33 is somewhat similar in the smoothness and forgiving nature, but it is more extended into high frequency. It's not as quite rolled off. And also the bottom end is not as authoritative or weighty, but still has really good bass control and the same amount of bass output in my opinion. So there's a little bit of difference in sound signature overall, but both are fantastic. Now, the Kinki Studio XM1 Plus is very interesting because it falls right between those two. While it has more authority than the M33 and has a similar extension in the high frequency, it doesn't quite have the authority of the Hago H190 in the bottom end. It is more cleaner, it is more crisp, it has more separation and imaging capability than the Hago H190, but M33 wins the imaging game by a smidge. So each one of these are excellent choices, it's just the small differences that I'm describing here. But what you have to realize right now is that the XM1 Plus is being compared in terms of its sound characteristic and performance to much more expensive units. Yes, the Hago and the M33 from NAD both have more capability and function, whereas the XM1 Plus from Kinki Studio is all analog and it has no digital or streaming capability. But that's something for you to consider considering your needs. Now, in my old XM1 review, I compared the XM1 to more of the expensive units from Dan D'Agostino. The sound signature reminded me a lot of the Dan D'Agostino design, where it was really clean, really articulate, really input and output, and sounded just very, very neutral, yet everything was so balanced and well organized in such a way that the sound was not overly warm, but it was not overly analytical either. It was smooth yet balanced with tons of detail and separation soundstage, and it was just a very fantastic experience that you really couldn't pinpoint what the unit was doing wrong. You know, you could say, to my taste, I want a little bit more warmer sound or a little bit more brighter sound like Name, but you really couldn't pinpoint one thing and say, oh, this amplifier is not sounding very good in this region. Everything was fairly neutral, yet it had tons of fun. And the XM1 Plus is much the same way. It has really no flaws that I can pinpoint and say, well, this could be better. Is it tube sounding? Is it a tube amplifier? No, it's not. Does it sound like a solid state amplifier? Yes, it does. But it sounds like a very good solid state amplifier, like the likes of Dan D'Agostino. Of course, I'm not saying that it competes with Dan D'Agostino, which is $40,000 to start, but what I am saying is that the sound signature is very similar in how well it's balanced, how it's very hard to nitpick the sound signature of this unit. And if you were thinking of picking up the old XM1 instead of getting a new XM1 or the XM1 Plus, then I think that's a perfectly good choice. And if you want to save a few bucks that way, because the only difference in sound signature that I can tell is that the XM1 Plus and the current versions of XM1 integrated units are more faster, cleaner sounding, but that's about it. They've done such a fantastic job from the beginning that the sound signature of this integrated unit, old or new, is fantastic from top to bottom and really hard to nitpick even as a reviewer who has reviewed thousands of units in this price category. So, how does it compare to the XB7 monoblocks? Well, the Kinki Studio XB7 monoblocks were more cleaner. So, quite surprisingly, if you hear the old XM1, you're like, wow, this is really clean. This is really balanced. I don't know how more balanced or how cleaner it can get. This is perfect. And then you hear the newer generation of the XM1 and the XM1 Plus, and you're like, wow, I didn't know it could get even cleaner and even more detailed and even more layering and, overall a more pleasant experience. And then you go to the B7 monoblocks and you experience the same thing. You're like, oh, okay, how did that happen? It just got better. And that's when you really perfect the sound signature. And when I had the B7, I had it hooked up to the P7 preamplifier. So I wanted to check if the P7 had any effect in making things sound cleaner and overall better in the sound signature. So I connected the P7 to the XM1 Plus and using the home theater bypass. And that really made it so hard to distinguish between the B7 and the integrated unit. Both sounded excellent, both clean, similar sound signature. There's a house sound of how balanced it is, how neutral, yet how full it sounds and musical it sounds. And that really left me to question, if you want monoblocks, if monoblock is something that you have in your mind, then sure, the B7 is definitely worth your while. But sonic-wise, the difference was so small that it may have been something that was my brain and not so much my ears telling me the differences. And in fact, the XM1 Plus is a dual mono design. So in this case, both are balanced as it gets. Of course, the XM1 Plus preamplifier section is not truly balanced and not truly dual mono. So that's the only exception. But when you connect it to the P7, that's a different story. And the performance changes to the extent where it's almost indistinguishable between the performance of the B7 monoblocks. So if you don't want to purchase the P7, there is another way to upgrade the XM1 Plus, and that's by switching the op amps. So unlike the B7 monoblocks, this unit, the XM1 Plus, do have op amps inside that can be switched out to something like the Burson Audio op amps, which I've tried. And it was hard for me to go back really because the sound was more resolving, smoother, more airy, and overall it was a much better sound that I got out of the unit when I switched the op amps. It was a pretty obvious difference. I wouldn't say as obvious or as big of an upgrade as getting a P7 as the preamplifier, but I definitely saw an improvement there and highly recommend it. So overall, this should be the easiest review that I've ever done, but in fact it is the hardest because there's really nothing to nitpick with this integrated amplifier. There's not a single thing that I would say, but this needs to be changed or I would like this better, because everything is so well balanced. It's even hard to describe the sound signature in such a way that makes it more obvious. So I'll lay it out this way. Hagel H190 is the warmest, NAD M33, and then the Kinki Studio EX-M1 and the B7 units, and then the name integrated amplifiers. So that's from warmest to brightest. So that's the best way I can describe it. And you can see right there, the NAD M33 and the Kinki Studio stuff are very small in terms of battling between what is neutrality. And so both are very balanced sound, very neutral, just input and output, really good attack and decay, articulation, and everything that you can ask for from a solid state amplifier. So that's pretty much it from me. Thank you for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If this video was helpful to you, click that like button and consider subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you guys on the next one.